This episode is brought to you by baluchithere Pooper Scooper Services. There's no more affectionate, loyal pet than a 24-foot tall, 19-ton hornless rhinoceros. Suck it, golden retrievers. Nothing says true love like when little Gloria nestles against you on the couch while you watch Matlock on the TV. But oh, driving that dump truck around on her walks to pick up after your baluchithere, that's the true test of love. Baluchithere Pooper Scooper Services handles daily cleanup at the park and schedules once per week yard service, so you can concentrate on bonding with your precious companion, or companions, it doesn't matter. And when you use the promo code REREAD, one word, BPSS will send you a custom bin for crate training and a calming hidey hole to alleviate their natural tendency for separation anxiety. And thank you, baluchithere Pooper Scooper Services, for sponsoring the Rereading Wolfe podcast. This episode is brought to you by the support of generous listeners just like you. You can learn how to be one of them at patreon.com/rereadingwolfe. And thank you, listener patrons, for supporting the Rereading Wolfe podcast.
Warning. The following discussion is deliberately riddled with spoilers and unhinged speculation on this nearly 40-year-old book, Gene Wolfe's The Book of the New Sun. You can't read a Gene Wolfe story. You can only reread a Gene Wolfe story.
Welcome to Rereading Wolfe. We don't pretend that this is the first time you and we have read these books. We want to understand them in as much detail as possible, and that means considering the works as a whole.
Hi, I'm James Wynn.
And I'm Craig Brewer.
Hey, Craig.
Hello, sir. How are you doing?
You know, Craig, I got to tell you, when we started this thing, people would respond to the episodes on their various platforms, Facebook, email, Twitter, Reddit, all the places. And, I have these long conversations with them. But now there are so many platforms. There's so many people. I confess, I can't always get into it with every comment. And I miss that.
It's hard to keep up with.
Yeah, it's a happy kind of bad news.
Oh, no, I know. And someone just posted... oh, shoot, I forgot his name. I had it on the tip of my tongue. But somebody just posted a big fan fiction on Reddit. And I was going to read it last night and totally got distracted. And so I keep meaning to do it because I told the guy, I'm like, I'll read it. Yes. And I really want to, but I keep forgetting.
Yeah. And after all, fanfic is going to be our next big empire that we're going to crush, right?
Exactly.
In order to give away all those books and those posters, we're going to have people do little short stories about Agia. At least that's what my plan is eventually.
We should actually talk about that and plan it.
We have to give those things away.
Yes.
So speaking of which, did you see about the short story collection coming out? Gene Wolfe short story collection from Tor?
Yes, we have news. It's so nice to have Wolfe news. Yep.
Right.
So, and it's going to be not just another best of. It's it's uncollected stuff. So it's things that I know you have because you and your incredibly awesome wife, who goes out and hunts down magazines and books and things that she knows you want, have gotten all kinds of those uncollected things. So old magazines and older collections with one-off stories that haven't seen the light of day for a long time. It's pretty awesome. So, by the way, speaking of, just to self-promote, if you are not following Rereading Wolfe on Instagram, do it, because that's where James posts all kinds of cool covers of the magazines where stories were originally published and different versions of the books, and definitely do that.
All right, well, let's get on with this then. Let's see, Mike Farrar.
Far are your arms from me.
He liked just about everything we did in the last episode. He says, this was another in a long series of great episodes, and I'm not butt kissing here, but I find it very exciting to be on this voyage of discovery with you all. Well, thanks for coming along.
That's very cool. And I keep worrying every time we do one lately. I'm like, have we really said much? Are we still just summarizing things? And then it turns out, no, there's plenty of stuff going on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in an hour and a half, we're going to come up with something. So he also says, you mentioned re-listens. This is an episode that demands a re-listen, perhaps several. Craig, by the time we do this, I've said it, and I'll do 2 additional listens to the episode. So I do re-listen, but I think it's amazing that there are people who are re-listening for fun. And we're talking for an hour and a half, 2 hours.
I wonder about lifestyles, but I mean, it is COVID, but generous spouses who are happy you have something to occupy yourself with. Yeah.
Put on your headphones.
Yep.
All right. Well, Mike liked Roy Lackey's theories about Jonas, especially the part about maybe Jonas being Sidero, even though I think Roy sort of abandoned that one near the end. But, with Wolfe theories, no theory is orphaned for long. He liked my Severian as the Megatherian in the cavern, even though I'm personally troubled by that one. But Mike liked it. You liked it. What have I done? But Mike says, it doesn't seem far-fetched to me at all. The entire new sun has him being enticed into the water, and once he gives in after the deluge, it becomes almost a home. He says at one point he's become Oannes to the people of Ushus. Add the attraction to Juturna, the pale skin of Thecla, Grandma Dorcas's uncanny similarities to the undying Sirac and her rebirth from the water, etc., etc. And then also Mike Benowitz, he likes it. He says, man, this episode with everyone is Severian theme led my mind to suggest that the Mandragora in Spirits at the end of Citadel of the Autarch is the real first Severian. It has a sun shaft shining on its dusty curcubit, so that marks it as family, right? And Severian insists that they are somewhat alike. He wants Severian to break the glass and kill him because his efforts have culminated. Just kidding, but also not. Well, Mike, you are truly enticing me with the first Severian angle. And Sean Michael Robinson will love that you've brought in the shaft of light, designating a family member, and the Mandragora calls him brother. The other possibility is that it's his twin. I have a related Valeria is everywhere theory also. I don't know, Craig. The everyone is Severian theory can work, but I guess it's not the story I want it to be.
I think we'd probably end up with a whole lot of exceptions by the time we keep working through stuff. Just like everyone is Severian, except for Talos, because we know he's not here. Maybe except for
Jonas and Still, I try to follow the clues wherever they lead, but people think the first Severian theory may be too easy to explain anything without proof. I disagree, but I'm going to save that one for later. Well, combine that with the everyone is Severian, well, slippery slope, Greg. Slippery slope. Mike Farrar also likes my all exultants are clones theory. He says, is there somewhere on the Earth list or another group where you've more fully explored the theory? This one really has my wheels turning. And Mega's trying to make all mankind into one as an Asia, while heroes are pushing an autarky where Severian contains multitudes in one. I don't know where it's all going, but damn if it isn't interesting. No, Mike, it's new. It sort of blossomed out of our discussion about House Azure and Severian's elevation.
But that connection, I don't think we made that one, did we, when we were talking about it before, about clones and Asha, never sure. But if the exultants, if they are clones, Vodalus is in league with Megatherians, and he wants to, bring the exultants, or at least he's definitely going to keep the exultants there in power. Thea seems to definitely think so. So you definitely have those two possibly in league there. And maybe you're just going to get a whole race of exultants.
Oh my. Yeah. Now I know they're evil. Well, I do think that seeing all the exultants as clones, it provides an appealing explanation for both false Thecla's statement that Thecla is no more the real Thecla than she is, and Severian smelling her scent shortly after sensing the Catherine maid in his room. Incidentally, Wolfe wrote 2 short stories in 1977 and 1980 about societies of women who reproduced totally by cloning without men. Many mansions and in Looking Glass Castle. So that's 3 years in the same year before Shadow of the Torturer was published. There is, however, a very significant hurdle. Severian makes no statement of recognition between the maid at his exaltation and false Thecla, or the real Thecla, and that's no small thing.
Yeah.
I mean, sure, Severian is actively occluding the story of his mother, because as autarch, of course, he knows who his mother was and the circumstances of her arrest and death. He would be able to know that story and access any records from the tower. He's actively occluding what he knows about his twin, and maybe Aglas's background too. So it's possible he's just not telling us the details of his reaction to the maid, so not to tell us too much. But I don't like that kind of explanation. And it could also be that, she was disguised in some way, but for a lot of reasons, I don't like that. And then again, given Severian's interaction with Thecla and false Thecla, that would be necessary, right?
Yeah. I think I know what it is, though.
Oh, yeah?
The mention of the Clone Wars happened in, 78, 79? The Star Wars.
Yeah.
So Wolfe was working on it. So if that's true, then what you have then is a Clone War.
Wow.
That's what it is. He was a fanboy working up his own sort of Star Wars fan fiction.
Help me, Obi-Wan Spicoli. Help me. So, Charles Gillingham.
But if you go down to Gillingham, you'll see the same as I.
Clarified the connection that he drew between H.P. Lovecraft's The Rats in the Walls to the Man-Apes Cave. He says, The Rats in the Walls ends with the main character discovering a massive cavern below his family's ancestral home. There's a whole city down there with buildings from all time periods up to about the 1600s. His ancestors kept people down there for eating so long that they became quadrupedal, which makes me wonder what the man-apes ate. Yeah, although having a whole lost civilization down there just guarding treasure is pretty cool and all, that doesn't make much sense to me. Why not just bury landmines? That's why I'm reminded of the Morlocks. Someone has to be maintaining all the future tech. Maybe man-apes live under the stone town maintaining its galactic satellite dish. Our reader interview with Diana Lambert, we were talking about, we were talking ill of Land Across. I have the book, but I've yet to read it, and I really need to. After all, we all have to walk across the hot coals sometime. But it provoked Callum McPherson on Facebook and others to come to the novel's defense. And Brian H. said, what I particularly love about Land Across is that it's like experiencing one of those weird and terrifying dreams. When I wake, I'm hugely relieved to find that it was only a dream, but part of me feels a sense of loss. The dream was so intensely strange and important while I was inside it, that I kind of wish I could go back to experience more and find out what it all meant.
That's a good way to put it. But I know I had to sort of stop myself because it was either in response to that or somewhere else where I was about to go on a rant against Land Across again. I'm like, no, just let it go. I did get my, why does everything just happen in coffee shops with them telling about everything cool that happened before? I did get that jab in there. But that one's even stumped Mark. Like he still will send me little texts or PMs or something when he's like, I'm still trying to figure out this damn thing on Land Across. I don't know what's going on. And I even reread it recently trying to help him, and I don't know. I'm lost.
Let me ask you this, because I haven't read it yet. Do you feel more lost with that novel than Interlibrary Loan?
Yeah, actually, because there are times in Land Across where I don't even know what the surface story is. Like, I mean, it's not truly. I mean, like, I just can't figure out motivations, like why characters are doing things, or like, yeah, it seems absolutely opaque to me. And I don't know.
Making notes for us to do a series on Land Across. That's it.
I don't know. Although who knows? Maybe if we did that, it would be like You and New Sun. Maybe I'd like it better once we figure something.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
That's a long hike.
Let's see here. Neil Smith.
Neil at the cross.
Said on Reddit, hearing about the derivations of Drota and Roach's name having similar meanings but in different languages leads me to wonder, are these names another twin pairing? Only instead of a boy-girl pair, they could be identical twins. They are at least nominally the same age, and I don't recall any contrasting physical descriptions being given. Well, actually, that's true. There are no real physical descriptions of Drote. So he says that would put a new spin on why Severian confuses Drote and Roche, which one saw the pikes in the first chapter, although his memory is very vivid and visual. That doesn't mean he understands well which one said what thing. And as I said, Craig, I find that to be a very unsatisfying solution to the Roche mix-up, but I can't defeat it from the text.
Mm-hmm. We don't get much to go on there.
Right. Let's see, on Twitter, Patrick DeWin, we got a very lengthy theory. That's pretty cool. He says, the further I go into the reading of the Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe, the more surprised I am that my favorite theory isn't spoken of much. Severian demonstrates that his and Thekla's memories have fused to the point that he remembers her past as his own, and in fact, his own presentation as a person sometimes is more Thekla than Severian. How many people are stuffed into that head of his by the time he's writing the book? Consequentially, why wouldn't we assume that much of his recollections of events are the recollections of others, or at least colored by the memories that he now has of collected autarchs? So the faults we see in his memory aren't faulty in the way we think. His memory is overlooked too by too much information to process, and people being reconstructed from the bits he has of them, the fingertip analogy. So to me, the book is more about memory and identity. Well done. Well done, Patrick. Craig, we actually banged this one around early on. I don't know where you stand on it now, but for me, this theory can explain Severian's confused memory. Maybe the Drosha-Drote error. I'm not so sure. But it can't explain the man-skin, doe-skin error, but I really don't have an explanation for that either. For me, an explanation of Severian's memory needs to explain Severian's peculiar statements about his memory within the related story and regarding the period before becoming autarch and extending after it. In chapter 3 of Shadow, he says that although he never forgets, he can't be sure his memory isn't lying to them. And in chapter 8 of Claw, he says he remembers when he recounted a memory different from the way he remembers it now. And most of these memories are not related to the lives of the autarch or Thekla's life. So if you're setting aside the first Severian solution, I see gravitating to this option. But it's just still hard for me to connect those dots.
Yeah, that was what I was going to say, was the pieces where he does have sort of memory problems, they seem specific to Severian's life sometimes. They're not big historical things, or they're not like the passages with Thekla where he just switches and all of a sudden he's Thekla, right? Because we do get a passage just like that. I like the idea. I mean, it's definitely a good candidate for why there might be some problems. The other thing about that, though, is that some of those little mistakes are so subtle that that subtle and then connected with hypothetical other people that are in there. I mean, I guess the other autarchs aren't hypothetical, but we don't know anything really specific about them. And so there's not much to connect that idea with the memory loss. It's not wrong or impossible by any means, but it seems unlikely to me. But there's lots of things that are unlikely that are true about this book. So.
Yes, that's absolutely true. Well, actually, Ian C. Smith has something very similar.
Aye, Mr. Smith.
He's taking it at a slightly different angle. He's been waiting for chapter 8 for a long time. Me too, as you know. And now he has something to say. He says, it was really interesting to hear you guys talking about theories relating to Abaya et al. Some great stuff here. However, my interest lies, as usual, in what the chapter says about Severian's memory. And I'd like to propose that it provides both an explanation for his repeated claims to a perfect memory and a final disproof of the same. And this is going to be a long one, but here goes. Okay, Ian, here we go. So, as he has done several times before, Severian waxes lyrical in this chapter about how great his memory is, and that makes me want to look for an immediate misremembering nearby, as these always seem to pop up whenever he makes memory claims. And sure enough, it shows up right at the start, where author Severian seems to have forgotten that he's previously told the reader several times that he has a perfect memory. Quote, you must have thought this repeating conversations verbatim was only a conventional device that I adopted. Truth is, I am cursed with perfect recollection. So far, so standard. But then we get this key sentence. I have recalled some scene to mind previously and how that remembered incident differed from the memory I have of it now. James uses a first Severian explanation for this, but I want to put that aside for now, as it's unfalsifiable and could be used to blanket explain any or all memory deficits, delusions, or anything else. Sorry, James. I get it. I get it.
I just get rid of the most powerful theory.
It's really... Instead, let's look at what specifically this sentence says. Okay, well, let's go for it, Ian. First of all, as a psychologist, I've always wondered how much Severian knew about the 1980s psychology of memory, specifically how memories are not seen as being stored data to be retrieved in perfect form, which is what is claimed of Severian's memory repeatedly, but are actively reconstructed by people, colored by their current situations. That's kind of a miracle. It's like magic that the brain actually does that. This sentence tells me that Wolfe knew about this aspect of the science of memory, and therefore knew that the memories just don't work the way Severian claims, unless he has a magic memory because he's divine. But second of all, even if he has a magic memory, the sentence is clearly a contradiction, right? Yes. Now, for the good stuff. You guys talked a lot at the start of the Claw reread about the early chapters of it mirroring the same chapter numbers of Shadow and found some great parallels. So what happens in chapter 8 of Shadow? Well, this is where Thecla tells Severian that, quote, when she is free, she is going to found a new, that is fake religious sect based on a contradiction that there is no afterlife and that this was revealed to her by a ghost. So I believe the contradictory sentence in chapter 8 of Claw is actually a sign that Thecla has actually achieved the goal she lays out in chapter 8 of Shadow. Severian's perfect memory is repeatedly seen as being key to him becoming and being the Conciliator. And when the author Severian makes these repeated claims regarding an impossible perfect memory, I propose it is actually Thecla in Severian speaking. She is free now, and so setting up the dogma of the religion of the Conciliator through writing these impossible claims that are frequently contradicted throughout the book, most starkly and finally in the sentence about how his memory is so perfect, he can even recall flaws in it. By the way, I think this is incredibly humorous. Thank you, Mr. Wolfe.
I was going to say, yeah, it's funny. If not, whether it's true or not, it would be funny. Like the idea is just, it's cool because it's Thecla, paying off on that grand deception.
Yeah.
It would also very much lend itself to, Peter Wright's kind of thing, or to some kind of story where what we're getting is, there are no miracles going on. It's all trying to, support a new regime or theology or whatever. But I guess the one question I would have is, I don't know if that would be the contradiction, because it's not a contradiction that's directly involved in the theology that she's, or the religion that she's coming up. It's a contradiction about a guy who's at the center of it, but it's not like a sort of Zen koan kind of contradiction of, there is no afterlife and you will live forever or something like that. Right. That just starts to sound a little bit too ingenious, a little bit on Wolfe's part, not on his. Not to say I really like it, because I agree with him. I think it's really funny as an idea, but I just doesn't pass my gut test this time, which
it feels like something Borges would do, though, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's definitely a kind of thing. Although maybe, again, I don't know, Borges was so into like actual big metaphysical contradictions instead of something. I don't know, but that's sort of the same idea. I don't know. It's something to hang on to, though. Yeah, as a really interesting thing. And I think it's definitely, if you want to see New Sun as more of a sort of atheistic book, or everything's just a manipulation by High Rose to get the future going, this is a cool thing to have in your pocket. Yeah. To say, oh, this is one way we could explain what's going on with that memory.
Well, if I was going to say that there's a problem, it's that we have a memoir of a guy who not only doesn't have a perfect memory, he doesn't really have an adequate memory. Right? I like you. I'm not comfortable with it, but obviously, I have something else I am comfortable with, so that helps. But he brings up whether it's false file. I am very aware that the first Severian theory is incredibly powerful, and I often think it is constantly in the back of my mind that I might actually be able to explain everything with it, and it could still be objectively wrong. So that's the trick, is to be able to present the story convincingly with it. And that's why I'm still running through. It still mostly works. So I do but I don't think that it inevitably works. Sometimes I run into situations that don't really quite fit. Like I actually point out that there's no reason for the first Severian to change the water into wine from the ewer at the end. I can't really think of a reason why he would choose to do that. But, it's still working mostly. I like that.
That just made me think, this is related, but not directly in what we talked about. But do you remember something in Earth of the New Sun where Severian's memory is wrong? Are there specific things that happen in Earth?
He makes another mention of the man's skin pouch that he kept the claw in.
Okay.
And I'm going to tell you, that is one reason why I believe that it's a typo. Because it's an error that just continues into the new novel.
Yeah. I was wondering too, like if the whole Draw to Roach thing was intentional, it would seem like one obvious thing to do would be to parallel that with some other kind of big obvious mistake in the first chapter of Earth. But I don't know. Anyway, that was just something else I was thinking, like just as a way to sort of substantiate that Wolfe was very intentionally.
He did it on purpose.
Yeah.
Well, we thought we had found something, but it turned out no, that wasn't it.
Yeah, but it would also be weird if Earth doesn't have any noticeable memory problems. Then that could well lead. It just kind of makes them seem a little bit more editorial mistakes rather than intentional. But I don't know.
I'm not convinced of that, because the events on Yesod are outside of the universe. And so, there's two things that I see for a first Severian issue. It's not a problem because once they leave the universe, Severian's connection of having a previous life is broken.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that when he gets off of Yesod and he lands on Earth, he's once again in my opinion, in a subsequent universe, and the first Severian is gone. So he ceases to have those problems. But it is curious if he has. I would be curious to know if we can detect places where he's had errors, continues to have errors.
I'll have to double check because I just don't remember. And also, too, he's writing it in much closer proximity to when those things happened than when he's writing it. It's like 10 years later, right? 10 years later.
Yes.
Later. I don't know. Hard to figure out lots of things. But that's one thing I just want to go check now.
Yeah. Let's see. There's also Gary Owens.
Gary, Indiana.
What a wonderful name.
Disagrees that it would be just awesome if someone became Gene Wolfe's Christopher Tolkien and published a Silmarillion of the New Sun. He says, James commented in the last podcast that he hoped for the eventual release of Wolfe's notes. They would be fascinating, but potentially could kill the real beauty of Wolfe. Answer all the questions, and the Book of the New Sun is over. As it is, we can reread and enjoy Wolfe forever. I love Wolfe's puzzles, but without his prose and our Sisyphean attempts to solve them, they would just be cheap tricks.
I get that.
Yeah. Wolfe said something similar to that to Neil Gaiman once. He said something to the effect of, the explanations never explain and the mysteries never die. But no, there was an interesting discussion around that. Personally, the Silmarillion, didn't spoil Lord of the Rings for me, and I feel like I understand, the Book of the New Sun now more than ever, and I have a higher opinion of it now than I ever did. It was an interesting conversation. The link is in the show notes.
No, I totally get the worry in the field, but there's that part of me that's like, let's find all the documents.
That's right.
All together and lay them all out. Yep.
I want to see the file. And Greg, we have an Apple podcast review.
Oh, we do? Oh, this actually surprises me. Oh, cool.
Yeah.
I haven't been checking the email.
It's a short one by Ike Lueri. I hope that pronunciation is right, Ike. The title is Detailed Analysis of SF's Most Detailed Works. It says, relaxed dialogue between these guys explains all the allusions in Gene Wolfe's classics I was too lazy to look up myself. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ike.
Yeah, thanks very much. I appreciate you doing it up on Apple Podcasts, because even though Apple Podcasts may soon be replaced by Spotify as the biggest thing, that's still the hub. Now, we also have new patrons, 3 folk who all signed up at the master level, so everybody gets music. First is Paul Cook.
So exercise some judgment. Too much broth can spoil the cook.
Ted Kohlberg.
Pull up skirt, ice Goldberg.
And he or she who shall be known as Tough Subject. So I hope you enjoy your little musical tag. But thank you so much for helping out. And remember that, you can help us out on Patreon. You can join up at $2 or $5 a month. Either one will get you access to the extra episodes we're putting up over there, which right now we have 2 long episodes. I'm like, was it 3 or 3.5 hours? I can't remember. On Borges's Tlon, Ukbar, and Orbis Tertius, which was a lot of fun for me.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was quite as much fun for you, but it was a lot of fun for me because I got to play philosophy teacher again.
I appreciate it because I am definitely out of my depth when it comes to that.
But that's a lot of fun over there. And the $5 level, you just get stickers, extra little surprises here and there. But if you're just curious, $2 a month will get access to those and help us pay for hosting fees and upgrading some stuff so that we can hopefully sound better and better.
Yeah. And also, everything I say here, Craig, everything I say, even this that I'm saying right now, it's all written down because that's the only way I can communicate on mic. So I've taken those, what Craig has always called the skeletons. And there's a link to that in a Patreon post. It's available to all of our patrons at the $2 level or above.
Yep.
And so thank you guys for making a lot of this stuff happen.
Absolutely. And if you want to just check it out, go to patreon.com and search for Rereading Wolfe Podcast. James has put a couple other things up there. I think you posted on Reddit too and on Facebook. So, but just a few other little write-ups that we've been talking about and that he's been doing to help us stay organized behind the scenes.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, a lot of the stuff I do post out there for the whole public. Someone actually said, thanks for doing this. You really shouldn't. But, especially the stuff for the New Sun that's directly related to New Sun, I'm trying to crack this book and I need your help. I can't hide those things away. But, what we should do is we should do some kind of a poll to see whether it offends the patrons that we give away so much for free when they're paying all of they're doing the heavy lifting. Craig, when Universal finally makes that Book of the New Sun movie, the chapter we're going to do here, it includes the money shot. And it also happens to include the movie ride at Universal Studios. Come on, kids. We're going to get in line and ride the baluchithere.
I always did want to ride one of the giant oliphants from Lord of the Rings. These things will work too. How many legs do you think they have? Right? Don't we find out horses have 6 legs? Destriers have the 6 legs?
I think, destriers do. A baluchithere only has 4 legs, but who knows about Severian's baluchithere?
Yeah. Chapter 9, The Liege of Leaves.
The Liege of Leagues.
So I got to ask from the beginning, is there a little pun or a little irony in the title? So the Liege of Leaves, he's also the Liege of Leaving. Eventually we find out that he wants to take back to the stars.
Oh, well, that's interesting.
Or is that pushing a little too far? I don't know.
It probably is, but I like it.
I was sitting there this time thinking, okay, so we're going to have a lot of talk about trees and things like that. But then the fact that instead of trees, he says Liege of Leaves, and I know it rhymes and alliteration and all that, but still, I was wondering, and so that's something I've never seen before. Like, why is he called the Liege of Leaves exactly? But we'll get there.
Yeah. Well, Liege, I think it originally meant like freedman. So I don't know. Do you think that's playing off the idea that he's looking for freedom for mankind? And
Maybe so. Yeah. I mean, they are about leaving Earth, or at least that's what he says. That's sort of the big dream that he's pushing forward, is that we can get technology back and start to explore the stars again. And that's kind of one of the components of his dream.
yeah.
But it's a weird mix too, because of the Liege of Leaves and all the tree imagery that we get here. There's also a whole lot about him that Severian insists is kind of like on the side of nature somehow. So there's this weird, mix going on with the sort of symbolism that Vodalus is all wrapped up in, but then the actual things that he wants to do. I mean, I don't know. Are they natural? I don't know. I don't know. But it's just a different set of things. I also think there's supposed to be a bit of a strong kind of Robin Hood vibe going on here.
I think he's trying to lure us into being on Vodalus's side initially.
And I think that makes sense too. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so this is the next day after Morwenna's execution. Severian is supposed to execute Barnock today, but they're never going to get around to that. If Severian left the mansion on Sunday afternoon, this is either Saturday morning or the following Sunday morning, at most. So says I. But it appears that Wolfe is still being deliberate in obscuring exactly how long it's been, right? So coming back from the cavern and Agia's assassination attempt, they are assaulted by two Cultellarii waiting in his hotel room. Vodalus, as a listener noted, and we discussed in the comments last time, tried to meet with Severian the night before, but he no sooner arrived than that Severian stole his horse and ran off to meet with Thecla.
Mm-hmm.
And consequently, Severian and Jonas weren't home when he arrived. And that Jonas was able to follow Severian on his marriage trip strikes me as a bigger deal all the time, but I can't come up with a textual explanation at this time, so I'm just going to have to let it go.
Yeah, I still got nothing on that.
Yeah, no, I think it's fishy. I might have something here eventually, but at this time, anything I say would be pure speculation.
Yeah. The only thing I can think is that maybe mine is like the way to it is so obvious that it's like a huge road. And the only reason I say that is because we find out about the trash heaps that are all around here.
But he didn't know where Severian just got a letter and he just, I'm out of here.
Yep. No, I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Oh, well. So the Cultellarii, one guy with a scar and the other with a beard, they push Severian and Jonas face to the wall and tie their hands. They put their cloaks on them so passerbys won't notice that they're being abducted and that their hands are tied behind their backs. They lead them to an exceptionally large baluchithere. And that means something, because a baluchithere is one of the most massive land animals ever known to have lived. Essentially, it's as massive as a land animal can be. It was a hornless rhinoceros, a strange description since the word rhinoceros means having a horn on its nose.
Which also seems like a very Wolfian kind of play.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Hornless rhinoceros. Well, you're not a rhinoceros.
A hornless horn monster.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's about as good a description as a lot of things we get.
But anyway, the message has been conveyed. You know what I mean. It looked like a cross between a rhino and a giraffe. It was about 20 feet tall, a bit less than 6 meters.
And somewhere he says 3 times the size of the height of a man.
Yeah. Right, which would be like 18 feet or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, the baluchithere is shifting its feet back and forth, and there's a plain howdah, which I suppose means that it's unadorned or that it's just a flat board on top of his back. A howdah is a saddle or a seat or a platform. I guess it's like a platform in this case because it's used to ride on top of an elephant. But in this case, it's a 20-foot tall rhino giraffe. Yeah. And the howdah is made of iron and horn. And whether the horn is a facade material or whether it means that this is really ruggedly or haphazardly constructed from ready materials, that's not clear. Wolfe seems to have given us a lot of leeway in our mental picture. So, as one does with elephants, the guy on Severian's left, the guy with the black beard, taps the back of the baluchithere's knee and it kneels. And then they're forced onto the howdah on its back. So, with the two kidnappers and the baluchithere driver and Severian and Jonas, there's 5 of them on the howdah. So, when arriving at Saltus, I assume from the south, Severian and Jonas passed through hills of debris from the mines, mostly large piles of stone and brick. I think the picture is like, a big junkyard of bricks and stones and some of the, only the most common types of artifacts. He doesn't mention it, but when he rode to meet Thecla, he passed through a few of these, but mostly he took off northeast where the force was closest to the village. And I've always thought of the river being on the east side of Saltus, but clearly Saltus is on the east side of the river with the Guile to the west. The direction they are taking now, which is, I suppose, nearly due north, is filled with heaps of tailings. So tailings are the term for when you mine ore and separate the valuable parts from the parts that aren't. The tailings are the parts that aren't. And so I guess this is like hills of stone and brick again. But remember that Earth is depleted of normal ores. So all the mines are mining materials of the past. Actually, I guess we do that now. Computer parts are sent off to poor countries where people break them apart and get the valuable metals. Well, so they do that in a massive systematic industry. Unlike in the South, there is no path through the hills or rolls, so I guess it's just one big mass of continuous mountains of debris. And in addition of stone and brick, in the useless debris that they've thrown out, there were other things that, quote, might otherwise have defamed their village and occupation. And there's a hint at a peculiar cultural perspective on some of the things of the past, things mined from the past that would have caused the people to think less of them if they were known to have touched them or extracted them, right?
Yeah, which is a weird kind of superstition aspect that they seem to have.
Well, it also might, we'll get to what other things that they might feel like they would like to mention that they're digging up. But you want to read this next section?
Yeah, and it's the thing he first says here is just how huge they are. So everything foul lay in tumbled heaps 10 times and more the height of the baluchithere's lofty back. Obscene statues, canted and crumbling, and human bones to which strips of dry flesh and banks of hair still clung. And with them 10,000 men and women, those who, in seeking a private resurrection, had rendered their corpses forever imperishable, lay here like drunkards after their debauch, their crystal sarcophagi broken, their limbs relaxed in grotesque array, their clothing rotted or rotting, and their eyes blindly fixed upon the sky.
So I think maybe these are the things that would otherwise have defamed their village and occupation.
Yeah, the actual
people. The concern that, that the miners would seem to them as grave robbers or something like that. Just like, Vogelus and his people.
Which is a weird kind of sort of taboo to have, because apparently mining things from the past is really, really important, but then not touching the recently dead seems to be super important. So maybe then maybe that's part of the reason of the weird taboo. Yeah,
it's a matter of context, right? Yeah. But I mean, they are sort of grave robbers, right? And they're not so different from the archaeologists who dig up mummies.
No, and I mean, I think that's reading it this time. I was like, that maybe that's kind of intentional. That the difference between how much of a problem they had with the actual grave robbers, but then this whole culture seems to be based around kind of the same thing. So
yeah. And these people who wanted, quote, a private resurrection, I guess, they're like people who have their bodies or heads cryogenically frozen. These are people who have been frozen without the need of cold. They've made their bodies imperishable for the day when technology would allow them to be brought back to life. However, people like that never consider that the people who would come up with that technology would be less interested in bringing multitudes of past generations back to life than just keeping themselves alive.
Yeah.
A common thread in Wolfe's stories, I think, is a contempt for the idea of a pitiful eternal life as opposed to embracing eternal change. We see it in Fifth and Cerberus here, most openly in The Borrowed Man and Interlibrary Loan.
Yeah. And the other thing, too, is the number of these 10,000s and more, right? I mean, just the number. It's not like he
just body after body after body.
Yeah, it's not like they stumbled on, oh, hey, it was a cryogenic place, that happened to have some sarcophagi. No, this is just a common thing,
right?
In the numberless hordes of things here. Yeah, even it almost makes me think that even this is from separate civilizations or generations. You get corpses from one society,
right?
Years later, were never, yeah.
So this is what became of those people who sought a private resurrection. They've been resurrected without life.
Mm-hmm.
Also, Severian mentions that these mountains twinkle with billions of shining shards of glass. So naturally, I see a Hamlet's Mill tableau here, and I'm right now struggling to imagine a set of constellation or stars that could be imagined as 5 men on a baluchithere. Maybe if the baluchithere were the massive constellation Novice, which is a ship constellation, but it's really big, and I have to think about that.
Okay.
So Severian and Jonas try to ask the thugs why they've been abducted and where they're going, but all they get is slapped around, so they just stop. So the baluchithere crawls its way through the mountains of worthless debris and incorruptible bodies, and eventually things calm down and Severian tries again. He asks, where are they taking them? And the guy with the scarred face says, to the wild, the home of the free men and lovely women.
That part reminds me this time of the beginning, or that part of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy where men were real men, women were real women, and small furry creatures from whatever were real small furry creatures from,
where the men are men and the women are too. So.
Right. What's that one from?
That was something I forget. That's something I picked up when I was 18 or something like that. Someone used to say that. Used to say that about certain towns. So Severian, who imagines that Agia is the only lovely woman around, and any cutthroat he meets or working for her, asks the guy with the scar if he works for her. And he laughs and shakes his head. My master is Vodalus of the Wood. Vodalus? Oh, so you know him. Well, I bet he's going to like you since you were going to put one of his servants on the rack. Interesting that they are supposed to be free men and readily admit to being Vodalus's servants. Just saying. Severian was about to tell him all about how he met Vodalus a year and a half ago, but then he started to doubt whether Vodalus would remember it. Now, if the theory is at all true that the body they were digging up was Thekla's, and there was some kind of timey-wimey thing going on, then as far as Vodalus is concerned, that thing happened a little over 2 weeks ago. So I'm sure he would remember. And I'm watching for a clue about that this time.
Yeah, and we'll talk about how some of those ideas play out with this in a second.
So Severian just says that if he'd known Barnock to be a servant of Vodalus, he would on no account have agreed to perform his excruciation. And this, of course, is a lie, and Severian acknowledges that. He'd figured that by doing the job and getting paid for it, he could limit Barnock's suffering. But they don't believe it either. It's a pitiful lie. Everyone knew Barnock was being executed for being Vodalus' spy. The 3 Vodalarii get a good laugh out of it, though. So Severian mentions that he took off to the northeast the night before, and he asks if that's where they're going now. And that's how he learned that Vodalus came to see him the night before, and someone stole his horse. Good luck getting that back. Jonas whispers to him that they're going true north, because he can tell by the sun. And the Vodalarii with the scar says that they are going north for a little bit, and then they're going to turn off shortly. So I can only assume they're going to turn off toward the east a little bit. To kill time, the Scar guy describes all the horrible things Vodalus does to captives. But Severian is a torture snob and thinks that they are, quote, primitive in the extreme and more productive of theatrical effects than true agony.
Torture snob is cool. That's a good way to put it. But then something odd happens. And this is where we get one of Severian's first little weird asides. As if some invisible hand had spread a curtain over us, the shadows of the tree fell upon the howdah. The glitter of billions of shards of glass was left behind with the staring of the dead eyes, and we entered into the coolness and green shade of the high forest. Among those mighty trunks, even the baluchithere, though he stood 3 times the height of a man, seemed no more than a little scurrying beast. And we who rode his back might have been pygmies from some children's tale, bound for the ant-hill stronghold of a pixie monarch. And it came to me that these trees had been hardly smaller when I was yet unborn, and had stood as they stood now when I was a child playing among the cypresses and peaceful tombs of our necropolis, and that they would stand yet, drinking in the last light of the dying sun, even as now, when I had been dead as long as those who rested there. I saw how little it weighed on the scale of things whether I lived or died, though my life was precious to me. And of those 2 thoughts, I forged a mood by which I should be ready to grasp each smallest chance to live, yet in which I cared not too much whether I saved myself or not. By that mood, as I think, I did live. It has been so good a friend to me that I've endeavored to wear it ever since, succeeding not always, but often.
Yeah. So what do you think?
Sort of like a very Zen-like. Yeah, it's a weird thing. It's the first part is he has a moment of a kind of perspective where he's like, I'm just a mote in this grander world, and these trees have been here so much longer than I've been and will outlast me, and has that feeling of insignificance. But then he kind of mixes that up, he says, with this sort of base survival instinct of, I don't want to die, I want to live. And somehow between the two, which are kind of contradictory, he says it put him in just the right mood.
Right.
I mean, it
made him calm, made him loose.
Yeah.
Maybe?
I mean, it sort of made him able to be careless even about the things that he cared most about. I mean, it's a weird kind of, I don't know, courage that is not careless necessarily, but that isn't overwhelmed by fear. It's the whole thing of like, whenever you have to go do something that matters a whole lot to you, that can paralyze you, right? And so it's like, how can I just be cool about this whole thing? And somehow he says, having these 2 ideas together put him in the perfect mood. Yeah, I wish I could do that. That'd be awesome if just having those 2 thoughts would actually induce that mood. But
if you could keep it, keep them both at the same level, and it's just, I don't know. Maybe it doesn't. I'm always looking for some type of meaning for why everything happens the way it happens, and maybe in this case, that's not. This is the why things happen.
Could be. It also kind of goes a long way to explaining something about those moments when Severian just seems to do reckless things. When he just kind of does crazy things, like I know the way he describes jumping when he's at the very beginning of Earth in the first chapter, like the way he describes, I had no idea what I was doing and my balance was all off. Nonetheless, I decided to just shoot myself straight up into the space. It's that kind of thing, or where he's like, I'm going to jump from sail to sail, and I have no idea if anyone could ever do this or not, but here I go. He does many things like that, but this is a nice kind of explanation that is, I don't know, I actually think a kind of good definition of bravery. Like when you are brave and calm and cool, it is kind of like you can have both these things going at once. But the other thing I want to focus on here is the fact that it's the trees that give him this perspective. It's specifically trees that give him this perspective of something bigger than him going on and that make him feel small. And I don't think it's accidental that also Votalis is going to be associated with the trees and all of history's great monuments. To Severian's going to talk about how any great structure that we build is focused on the trees, and he's the Liege of Leaves too. So all this stuff about trees, I got some stuff I want to say that I want to come back to, but this is the first place where he specifically calls out the trees as somehow connected to something much bigger than any one person.
Is Severian the Liege of Leaves? I
don't know. I mean, he's the Liege of Light, which, in a way, of the sun, right? Which gives life to trees. So yeah, but we'll talk about that, because I know Mark always has a ton to say about trees, and the way that vines and trees and foliage really have a huge important thing here. I just want to point out that it's complicated. And so, Mark has some great things to do, but I think this is, we'll get back to it, but there's a lot of weird stuff going on with trees here.
We shall cycle around to it. So as Severian is mulling over this silent soliloquy, imagine the camera panning closer and closer as the voiceover of Severian's thoughts drown everything else out. And then suddenly Jonas says, Severian, are you all right?
Yeah, that's pretty much how it goes. Yeah.
Yeah. So Severian's brought back to the world of the story, and he says, yeah, did I see Mel? He says, oh, for a moment.
Yeah.
So he says, I was only reflecting on the familiarity of this place, seeking to understand it. I think it recalls to me the many summer days in our citadel. These trees are nearly as large as the towers there, and many of the towers are wrapped in ivory, so that in quiet summer weather, the light between them has this emerald quality. And this sense of recall is, I don't know, this is part of the reason why I want to think that there's something else going on, because whenever Severian is recalling something, whatever you think is going on, that means something. Certainly thematically.
So what he says here is that he's thinking about, the necropolis and how the trees look a lot like the towers when they're wrapped in ivory. And so he was thinking they're very similar, which is so weird because that's like the opposite of a tree in some ways. I mean, granted, the vines are there to, I don't know, maybe you think nature coming back over something, but you would think that there's an obvious difference between tree as natural living thing and then giant failed technological construction or something. But
Right.
to him, they're very similar. The other thing I wanted to point out too about the whole weird soliloquy is it sounds like what he's describing is bravery. And just a couple chapters ago, we talked about how everything Severian was just obsessed with cowardice and bravery, right? And everything he was talking about Gerlos and about how Gerlos was a coward and he was brave. And now we've got another kind of weird discussion of bravery here, which is this time put in terms of like taking things seriously and not taking things, or not necessarily not taking them seriously, but worrying too much.
Not recognizing your place in the situation.
Yeah, and not getting caught up with the future in some ways. Like, even though he desires to live, it's not like he's paralyzed by the possibility that he could lose it, which was kind of what he associated with cowardice, right? Of thinking too much about what's going on. And not getting in there. And I don't know, the one thing this makes me think about is some of the things that we've talked about. And actually, I think that came up in a couple of the reader interviews about how the reason maybe Severian is chosen as the one who can do this thing and make this decision in the end is because there's something about him that's reckless and that isn't so horribly sort of self-preservative, right? I mean, that even though, yes, he wants to live, he still can make really tough, really even rash decisions sometimes. Right. So yeah, I feel like we're kind of getting here a little bit maybe about why Severian can pass the test in the end, if there's something about this kind of bravery, which can be both selfish and unselfish at the same time.
And his description of what he was thinking about, though, to Jonas is slightly different than, or at least coming at it from a different angle of what he says he was thinking in his soliloquy.
Yeah. And also it's the way that he describes, he was like, did I seem ill? And Jonas says for a second, like, yeah, you did. Like, just for a second, you seemed kind of sick. So something about this bravery made Severian look wrong too, which is kind of a weird thing. Like, it's not like he looked calm and serene and holy. It's like, no, he looked sick. So it's not a perfect thing. In other words, I don't think that what Wolfe is doing is saying right here, and this is what bravery is. Like, I think he's sort of describing something specific to Severian. Does that make sense? Like what kind of courage he particularly needs. But it's not something that I think everybody can have all the time, because
well, I mean, in the past, whenever I see these moments of Severian talking about something seeming familiar, I've always kind of defaulted, since I've had that tool available, to some sort of first Severian theory. But the truth is, I can't really see why that would be important, other than, you can say, well, first Severian was here also, but then so what? For many places, the first Severian self-evidently would have been as well.
Yeah, and the memory to the necropolis, that one I don't really get. It's what comes next that really does make sense as a kind of comparison, because we're going to get some flood imagery.
Yeah. So finally, Severian says, it's quiet here, like it is there in the necropolis. And I guess, he's thinking about maybe the view from his mausoleum. And Jonas doesn't say anything to suggest he knows the citadel intimately. He just says, oh, yeah? And Severian says, well, you're a sailor. You must have gone by it lots in boats. And he says, occasionally, yes. And he's actually, I think we're going to understand that he did go buy it, but in a ship, but not in a
Right.
boat.
Right.
And then Severian suggests that he always wanted to be a sailor. And among all the other parallels, but between Hathor and Severian, here is another one. And we find out the first time that Severian ever rode on a boat was when he and Agia were ferried to the Botanic Gardens on the island in the middle of the river, an event that was barely implied at all, if at all. And then he took his second boat ride immediately after in the Lake of Birds. And something interesting, he never mentions that he and Agia and Dorcas had to take a ferry off the island. So I don't know. What's the deal with that?
Third boat rides are not as exciting, apparently.
It became old hat by then. He says that riding on this animal feels a lot like riding on a boat. And Craig, now I'm positive that the baluchithere is the constellation Navis. And if you were going to get a picture of this tableau of the five of them, then you should draw it from the constellations that are above Navis. He says, I feel that I'm traveling through the citadel in a flood, solemnly rowed. And Jonas is looking at him like, this guy is troubled. And he looks so serious that Severian Severian laughs in his face because Severian is a doofus, man. And then something weird happens, really. What happens at the plot level is that Severian stands up, but this is the way he describes it.
He says, I burst out laughing at the sight of his face and stood up, meaning, I think, to look over the side of the howdah and show by some remark about the forest floor that I was merely indulging my fancy.
So the sense he gives here is that he doesn't really know why he stood up. He just did. And he was going to stand up and look over the side of the howdah and at the ground and say, ha, just curious what the ground is like, which is a weird and stupid thing to say. Severian, with this laughing and random behavior, is just acting like he's stoned. So I don't know. Nothing particularly gives me an opportunity to frame this in a way that is meaningful to me. And maybe it's just his new mood that he's gotten, where he doesn't really care about things one way or the other, but he does care about them. I don't know.
That was my thought. I think of this kind of like the Zen idea of wu wei, of like do things without doing them, like do things without effort or without trying. And it's almost like he's saying that the kind of mood he had to deal with survival was to stop worrying so much and just kind of go totally by instinct and feel. So I don't know. I get the sense maybe he knew he was going to have to do something. And I mean, he reacts so quickly when the guy attacks him here in a second that it almost makes me think that what he was really doing was psyching himself up to be like, all right, we're going to take on all these people, even though I'm still tied up. Right. And
which is fine. Why not say that?
Well, that's why I said wu wei, because it's kind of like in order to be successful at it, he couldn't plan it. And so he had to even maybe kind of catch himself off guard and by surprise a little bit. I don't know. I mean, that may be thinking way too much into this, and it could just, be a weird point where maybe Wolfe didn't quite say as well.
We have to get from here to there.
I mean, it's a good way to start a fight, but I don't know. I mean, with the way that Severian was talking, it could be. But before we do that, though, I do want to point out that Severian says here, it's like I was lying in a boat in a flood going through the citadel. That's not an innocent comparison, right? It's not just because it was moving back and forth, because we know that what Severian eventually is going to do is flood the earth. Now, even though that only happens in Earth, it's only ever actually spelled out in Earth. The play certainly talks about the flood. The symbols have the ship Volant is like maybe flying over a flood, or something about the rising fountain over waters. There's plenty of images just in the 4 books of the New Sun to talk about the flood itself. So I think this is very intentional. I don't know if I'd go so far as to say it's actually Severian having a memory from the future or from another experience. It could be, though, because this is kind of precisely what's going to happen. He's going to be floating in the flood at some point in the future.
Right. Well, anyway, so when Severian stands up, remember his hands are tied behind him. The scarred guy stands up too and points his dagger at his throat, just a half an inch away. and he tells Severian to sit himself back down. But Severian decides to be a jackass because, he's stoned. And he just shakes his head. No. I mean, this guy has a job to do, and Severian is just trying to provoke him. And if what happens next with Severian's plans, that'd be one thing. But Severian says it wasn't. So the scarred guy says, get down or I'll rip your belly open. And Severian says, Mr. Smug, and lose the glory of bringing me back? I don't think so. Wait until the others tell Vodalus that you had me and you stabbed me while my hands were tied. And here we go. The guy with the beard is holding Terminus Est. And I guess, he doesn't have any other weapons. Yes, he does. He does have other weapons, but he decides to use Terminus Est anyway. Yeah. And he decides to pull the sword out of its sheath, but he really doesn't know the right way to do it. The right way is to grab the sword by the quillions, the crossguard, and turn the sword perpendicular, holding it by the sheath, and then pull the sheath and the sword away from each other with both hands. But this guy holds the sheath steady in one hand, straight up and down, and holding the sword by the handle pulls up like he was, quote, jerking a weed from a field. So this puts you off balance when the sword comes out because it's a long sword. And when the baluchithere rolls as it walks, the bearded guy bumps into Scarface and they both get cut by the sword. Quote, the edges of the blade keen enough to part a hair. So Scarface jumps back, and when he does, Jonas does a judo move to trip him. He puts one leg behind Scarface's leg, and then he wraps the other leg around the other side of his leg, and Scarface falls right off of the howdah, even though there is a railing.
This is totally a good moment for MST3K fans that we have our first official railing kill. There's a whole episode where people constantly die by falling over a railing. So
over a rail,
railing kills. Yep. So there we go.
That just reminds me that Joe Bob Briggs would always count monkey foos in his movies. And we just had a chapter of monkey foo. So Beardo drops Terminus Est to look at his nasty cut. And Severian says, I knew that weapon as I know my own hand. Look, it's been about 30 chapters since you got that sword, Severian, but it's really only been a week. But never mind that. In almost a single move, Severian turns backwards, and with his tied hands, he holds the hilt and clasps the end of the blade with his feet, and he cuts the ropes on his wrists, like they were pasta. Beardo now pulls a dagger, which of course is what he should have done in the first place. But Severian kicks him in the groin. I tell you, Severian is like a dancer at this moment. Beardo bends over, double. This is a perfect setup to Severian using Terminus Est to remove his head. Honestly, I'm guessing that's what happened here. And when you do that and you don't have the victim kneel first, the contraction of the muscles causes him to stand up, suddenly erect with no head. And, the spray of blood from Beardo alerts the driver now that something is going on. The driver, Severian calls him the trainer, is sitting outside the howdah. He looks back and Severian leans over the railing and takes off his head with a one-handed horizontal strike. Hello, Conan.
Yeah, exactly. Which, remember, too, he said that horizontal strike was much harder to do, right? He bragged about that with Merwina.
Well, now he's been practicing. Yeah.
Yep. But now he's doing it just after being set loose on the back of a moving giant elephant, giraffe, rhino thing. Yeah. I will say, this is not, though, the most Conan moment. I actually think the biggest one is when he steps into the field to see Vodalus, and he's still there. Like, we're going to get that in a second.
Yeah, it's coming. It is coming, yes.
You got to admit, of all the sort of sure, cheesy action moments. I mean, it's fun. It's cool stuff. But then to have it sort of like so perfectly framed by him sort of showing up in this moment, blood falling off of him and holding him, shirtless and with his sword standing out. It is so wonderfully over the top. Like, it is exactly the kind of Conan, oh shoot, the artist,
Franzetta?
Yeah. So perfect Conan Franzetta kind of moment. And it's gratuitous, but it's so fun. Like, it's so well done that I love it.
Yeah. So at this, as you say, at this very moment, the animal steps out between two giant trees that are growing so close that the animal seemed to have to squeeze himself like a mouse through a crevice in a wall. After the trees, the forest opens up into a glade, unlike Severian had seen in the forest up to that point.
He says, I have to read this because it's one of my favorite parts. So, where grass grew as well as fern, and spots of sunlight, unshaded with green and rich as orpiment, played over the turf. Here Vodulus had caused to be erected his throne, beneath a canopy woven of flowering vines. And here, as it chanced, he sat with the chatelaine Thea beside him, just as we entered, judging and rewarding his followers.
Let's see. Orpiment is a deep-colored orange-yellow arsenic sulfide mineral. So I guess this is kind of yellow-orange color,
bright
right?
Yellow,
Green,
sort of some kind of sun. And since we got the red sun, this isn't going to look exactly like what we might think of as, the bright, blinding forest clearings. Instead, it's got this weirdish orangey kind of thing. Yeah.
And the scene where we see Vodulus is kind of reminiscent of Robin Hood.
Mm-hmm.
Jonas is lying on the floor of the howdah. He's cutting the ropes of his hands with Beardo's dagger. Severian's interest into Vodulus's glade with Thea at his side could not have been more perfect.
Yep.
He's standing erect on the back of the baluchithere, holding up his sword, bloody to the hilt in his Phlegon cloak. The baluchithere is being driven by a headless man, no doubt spouting a fountain of blood. And I suppose Beardo finally collapsed or fell off the animal. There's no mention of his erect, headless body. But that feeling he got when he saw the dead bodies and decided that he would fight to live without concern for whether he had lived or died, it caused him to make no attempt to flee. If he had fled, they would have killed him. The Cultellarii are all dodging the baluchithere as it strode driverless into the glade. It finally stops in front of Vodulus's canopy and throne. Once again, could not be more perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And the driver finally fell forward and landed at Vodulus's feet. Then Severian leaned out of the howdah, tapped the animal behind the knee with his sword to get it to kneel. A perfect introduction to this hero. Could not have gone better. This is like the world's best interview.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So Vodulus smiled a thin smile that held many things, but amusement was one of them, and perhaps the foremost. I sent my men to fetch the headsman, he said. I perceive they succeeded.
That's an interesting description of that smile.
Yeah. Held many things, which indeed it does.
Yeah.
He's a complicated dude. Not the most complicated, but...
So Severian salutes with his sword by holding the hilt before his eyes as they were taught to do when an exultant came to observe an execution in the grand court. But Severian corrects him. He reminds him of their first meeting when Severian prevented Vodulus from being beheaded. Sir, they have brought you the anti-headsman. There was a time when your own would have rolled on fresh-turned soil had it not been for me. Severian says he looked at me more closely then, at my face instead of at my sword and cloak. And after a moment he said, Yes, you were the youth. Has it been that long? Just long enough, sir. So, like I said, there's a theory that Severian's meeting with Vodulus occurred, as Vodulus reckons time, only a little over a week, 2 weeks ago. And the body that they extracted was feckless, and I admit to finding that very appealing. More appealing all the time since I first heard it, and it just really has grown on me. It feels apt. However, this seems to suggest that it was as long ago for Vodulus as it was for Severian, that he remembers it being some time ago, and Severian has grown a bit since then. I admit it's not definitive, but as I read this remark, I read it as a strike against that theory.
Yeah, because in order to make that work, you'd really have to either make Vodulus truly clueless or have him be sort of completely nonplussed at the fact that, oh yeah, you're that same little kid I saw 2 weeks ago, now suddenly grown up.
Yeah, it's been a year and a half for him. So
right. So something doesn't quite add up to that. But I don't know, but there's still, like we had talked about before, there's still a lot of ways that people can think of that body being Thecla. And I mean, I still am, I'm still caught up in the fact that he talks about getting lost in the path, which getting in that first chapter, which is Sir Severian does, which is exactly how time travel always happens when you sort of go down a path and seem to get turned around a little bit. So yeah, there's still lots of reasons to wonder if it's there, but this part, I agree with you, does seem to make it much harder to come up, because you have to do even more explaining about this one vague quote. Yeah.
Right. So Vodalus promises to talk about their encounter in private, but he asks him to stand at his left while he conducts business. Severian and Jonas get off the baluchithere, and two grooms lead him away, and there's no mention of people reclaiming Scarface and Beardo's bodies or heads or anyone dragging the driver's body away from in front of Vodalus. He just keeps on doing his administrative affairs, maybe, with this headless body at his feet.
It's also the first time we really see a kind of king-ish thing going on here, right? We've heard about the autarch so much, but this is the first image of what we typically think of as a kind of sword and sorcery king, right? He's got the canopy, he's got a throne, he's got a lady beside him. All these people are coming to him. It's like a typical court. And so it almost feels like, okay, we're being shown something that is stereotypical, even kind of genre like here, but that almost means that it has to not be right. Right. And that's kind of all the rules that we've learned through reading this up so far, is that whenever anything seems deliberately fantasy, something totally else is going on. And even though this isn't supernatural or magical, it is so, I mean, like the trees standing as like columns, and so many of the ways that he describes, as he'll do in a second, about how the trees look like architecture. I mean, some of that seems like total call out to Tolkien and elf kingdoms and things like that. So we're getting some sort of stereotypical things, which should, I think, at this point, prime us to think, okay, this must be all wrong in some way. And of course, we're going to find out. Yeah, Vodalus.
Well, we wouldn't know. If we were the first time, we wouldn't. We would think, oh, okay, this is the hero we've heard about. I can see how this story is progressing.
Yeah.
And we're not going to actually get another throne room type scene. Even though we're going to House Absolute, and we're going to meet the autarch, we're not going to get a scene like this until Earth of the New Sun.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's a very different context.
Right, exactly.
So he keeps on. He says, "There we waited and heard Vodalus give his orders and transmit his plans, reward and punish for perhaps a watch. All the boasted human panoply of pillars and arches is no more than an imitation in sterile stone of the boles and vaulting branches of the forest. And here it seemed to me that there was scarcely any difference between the two, except that the one was gray or white, and the other brown and pale green. Then I believed I understood why all the soldiers of the autarch and all the thronging retainers of the exultants could not subdue Vodalus. He occupied the mightiest fortress of earth, greater far than our citadel, to which I had likened it."
So essentially, he makes a point that the purpose of columns in architecture is to imply the majesty of the forest, which I suppose could be true. You know, like Corinthian columns with their leaves at the top. Actually, I think that Wolfe makes an analogy between those and trees at one point in the Fifth Head of Cerberus.
Oh, cool. But I like this too, because we're going back to something special about the trees. Like before, right, the trees were things that were so much more significant in the world and made mankind feel small. Now we have, what does he say again? All the boasted human panoply of pillars and arches. Like that's all just people trying to make things that were kind of like trees, and they're pale imitations, right? Gray or white compared to the actual living colors. So the trees here seem really, really good. And in both cases, the trees seem super powerful and super good, but we'll see if that lasts, because we'll get there. I got to get to the end of the chapter before I can pull all this together. But
yeah. Then Vodalus dismisses everyone and gets up from the dais, raised platform that he's sitting on, so he could see everyone, and everyone would know that, you know, he was above them. And he gets up from the dais to talk to Severian. Remember that Vodalus is a true exultant. Even though Severian is tall for a normal man, Vodalus is taller even than Thecla. And Thea is tall too. And Severian says Vodalus bent over him as Severian would have bent above a child. We mentioned Tolkien references, and this scene calls to mind Frodo and Sam meeting Galadriel
totally.
and Celeborn in The Lord of the Ring. Volus says, "You served me once. For that, I will spare your life, whatever else befalls, though it may be necessary that you remain my guest for a time. Knowing that your life is no longer in danger, will you serve me again?"
And so this is another one of Severian's kind of asides, but he's also going to tell it to Vodalus too. But he says, "The oath to the autarch I had taken on the occasion of my elevation had not the strength to resist the memory of that misty evening with which I begun this account of my life. Oaths are only mere weak things of honor compared to the benefits we give to others, which are things of the spirit. Let us once save another, and we are his for life. I've often heard it said that gratitude is not to be found. This is not true. Those who say so have always looked in the mistaken place. One who truly benefits another is for a moment at a level with the Pancreator, and in gratitude for that elevation will serve the other all his days. And so I told Vodalus."
So no oath is as meaningful as an act of charity to another person. Save a life, and that life owns you by some invisible, unbreakable chains. And maybe that's the meaning of fatherhood, right? Why a child means more to a father than a father could ever mean to a child. So, to that sacred affirmation, Vodalus says, "Well, good, whatever, let's eat." And I'll give you your orders.
Right. Which can go by so fast here. You know, when you're reading it, especially for the first time, that the way, I mean, Wolfe totally understates it. But how does he say? Oh yeah, the actual order, he's like, "Good," he said, and clapped me on the shoulder. "Come, not far from here we have a meal prepared." Right? Like, it's just so like, I mean, Severian's really basically saying, you know,
Yeah.
I have this deep, well thought out reason for why I owe you myself, and you have given me an experience closest to God that I can ever have. And Vodalus just kind of shrugs it off. And
Yeah.
it's subtle, especially maybe when you read it the first time, but it's totally the first thing that completely undercuts all this sort of high seriousness that Severian's been building up through the whole thing about, you know, wanting to show how important Vodalus had been to him, and all this sort of high heroism and all the seriousness of all this tree imagery that goes along with Vodalus. But then right here at the end, it's just like, cool. Yeah, it's so perfect, to me at least, a kind of undercutting of what Vodalus actually is that when he's presented with something super serious by somebody, he doesn't even really recognize it.
Yeah. Yeah. And Severian says, "Sir, I have disgraced my guilt once. I only ask that I may not be asked to disgrace it again." I guess, essentially, I've declared you my leader, but please don't ask me to do anything to embarrass the torturers anymore.
Which is a little weird, too, because it's like we would think that his oath to the autarch, like to the leader, would be the main thing. But this really shows Severian's, like, I mean, his loyalty is very specific, right?
Right.
It's specifically to his guild, because that's his family, the only family he's ever known. But it's just interesting where you would think in a sort of medieval society type thing like this, right? The loyalty should go all the way primarily to your king or something like that, but it doesn't. It's very local.
And to this, Vodalus replies, "No one will know what you will do for me." And so that's good enough for Severian. He'll agree to do things that are contrary to the oath that he's made, but no one will find out about that. So, okay. And something we should point out at this point, Vodalus is a liar. He's going to have Severian deliver a message to his, quote, agent in the House Absolute. Vodalus doesn't know that that agent is the autarch himself, who is waiting for Severian to arrive. But part of that message is for his agent to kill Severian.
Yep. So another way that Vodalus undercuts all that sort of greatness and goodness that's here.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, all this stuff about Vodalus I think is really cool, also because it latches on to my sort of obsession with the color symbolism in here, because everything in this is all about green. Like, there's green in the background of everything that goes on in this chapter. And in the end, you're left with the trees, and even, I mean, if you're thinking about color green, it's all ends up really ambiguous. Like, the whole point is not in the end that you know, I worried before, like, are there ways you can code blue and green? Like, are blue and green in Wolfe's mind, or even in one story, do they have something to them? I don't know. But what this chapter really kind of clarified for me was that the thing about the colors is that they always can represent one side of things, but then there's also always kind of a yin yang thing going on. Like there's always a darker side. So with the trees, Severian's saying all these things that seem on the surface true. Like, you go see the redwoods in California and you're humbled by, the age and the giant, just all the amazing things that go on with that. And the fact that here he talks about how maybe all of human architecture is just an attempt to live up to whatever these grand trees represent. Mm-hmm. But also if the title of this is The Liege of Leaves, and we're finding out that Vodulus, who is borrowing that kind of symbolism, he's pretty empty. Right. In the end, we're going to know that.
And he has, he has no reference for these trees. This is where he's hiding out, but he wants to leave. He wants to take off to the stars.
Oh yeah. Yeah. He doesn't want to live in these leaves. He's not like the elves. This is not really his home. Right. So he's he's a fake elf at this thing. And he's sort of using that elf kind of mystique in order to make himself seem powerful. And it seems to work. Like even Severian is like, yes, his entire, all of the wild was his, was his fortress.
Right. It was his fortress, his cathedral, his castle. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm curious too, because Mark always talks about how trees and the lianas in Short Sun, how there's always something sinister about those that's connected there. But it's a sinister that's also kind of like a halfway point between something else. Like it's always that two-sided thing of a kind of evolution combined with something that's not quite developed yet. But I feel like you're still getting that with here. Like there's all kinds of wonderful stuff in the green that's come through, and there's all those Robin Hood associations and all the sort of purity associations and all the things greater than human beings and uncorrupted. This purity in nature, but then also things can sort of turn that and twist it.
Right.
And we see that a couple of times, like the spaceships that are covered in ivy and look maybe like trees, but are really just kind of a corrupted version of apparently these other things. So it's a cool chapter where you get all these moments with the imagery that's kind of, it keeps switching. It keeps showing different sides of itself that I just think is really cool. But now I want to ask Mark about how he might connect the stuff with tree imagery and tree symbolism here to the other things later in the book. Yeah. And also in the end, I think it's a cool way where everything in the chapter is priming you for this big entrance where we're going to see Vodulus and Severian's going to come in starts off as a hero and whatnot. But it's so cool how he just really quickly, with one little tiny scene right at the end, makes Vodulus seem like small.
Yeah. No, from this point, Vodulus is just going to shrink more and more and more.
There's all kinds of things from the next couple chapters really start to make him look non-mythic. And it's true. I mean, it's Severian sort of finally coming face to face with one of his idols and realizing, he's flawed. Even if Severian doesn't know the depth of it quite yet, he's certainly at this point going to realize, it's not like suddenly going to make my life perfect and meaningful by following Vodulus.
Yeah.
But even like he says, there was still something about Vodulus that set him on this path. Like the image of what he thought Vodulus might represent was something that really inspired him. And he's going to find out that he can't get that in Vodulus, but there's still something about that coin and about that promise of what Vodulus could have meant as a symbol that's still going to make him into something else. So, But it's another kind of cool thing where it's like the thing that I thought the symbol meant wasn't, and there was something that it meant even more.
And, it's interesting. The chapters that have the most action seem to go by really fast. We don't seem to take much time talking. We can talk for hours about something about some thought that Severian has about trees, but you get these scenes where really amazing action scenes.
Yeah,
like this one, something that probably a lot of fantasy authors would just relish and just lavish over. This is the center of the narrative, and for this, it's great. And then it's over, and you can recognize that it's well done. Wolfe could have written scenes like this over and over and over. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's still, as far as a visual thing goes, it's badass, right? It's so cool. But what's fun about it is he gives you that thing. But then and I would think like a typical chapter would end, right, with Severian standing and that there, like the last would be like, my liege, I am here, or something, whatever.
Right.
Some kind of goofy like one-liner. But instead what he does is he carries it on to, okay, great. It's wonderful to see you. Actually stand over there for a minute or an hour or so, because I got to take care of some stuff. Then we'll talk. And finally, when he gets his audience with him, he says this really big thing, and the chapter just ends with, cool, thanks, man. Right.
Yeah.
And,
oh, good. You're going to follow me. Good.
Yeah. It's just a really, really thoughtful way to get all that excitement of those action-filled things, but then to turn it into a character thing where Severian does this amazing thing, and it's more important for Vodalus to stay in charge. And so instead of, certainly he's not going to be awed by that, but he's also not really going to recognize like how amazing that was. Like to see him come in like that. It's more like, great, thanks. Let me handle my business because I'm more important. And it's just a cool way to give you all this sort of insight into how Vodalus doesn't live up to the sort of beautiful, wonderful hope of a king in exile or something like that. Right. It's just a small man doing his thing.
And we certainly hope that y'all have comments, thoughts, corrections, and complaints about this highly symbolic, highly elusive, and literary referential scene that we've had in this chapter. And I hope that you will bring them all to us on the Facebook group, the subreddit, Twitter, or email. You can find out how to do that on the show notes. Leave an Apple Podcast review and tell your wolf reading friends. And until you hear from us next, may the Moira favor you.
See you later.
Imagine yourself there in the world's largest overstuffed chair, knocking down trees, anything you please. But elephants don't have to be like that. They can be agile as a kitty cat, stand on the tiptoes. Oh. Well, remember, elephants never forget. Let's go for an elephant ride. Go for an elephant ride. Rumble through the jungle, side to side. Whoa, let's go for an elephant ride. Whoa, let's go for an elephant ride. Whoa, let's go for an elephant ride. Ride, 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 elephant ride, 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 ride. Swing up on the side of a hide so wide. Take the great, great tide. Get jungle-fied. Go for an elephant ride.
Among those mighty trunks, even the baluchithere. Okay, good. So we'll see how it all works with a new microphone this time, and I'm sure it'll sound just fine. I'm sure it'll be all right.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see if it sounds like I'm talking to you through a tin can and a string. Try again. Solemn. How do you say solemnly?
You're like rocking baluchithere.
In the Patreon posts, so try then, because this is actually, I did not write this down.
Oh, did I lose you again?
No, I'm
okay.
I'm sorry about that.
I suddenly
breathe heavy. I should breathe heavily when I do that. Well, it's a short one by Ike Lurie, it's a short one by Ike Lurie. It's a short one by It's a short one by Ike Lurie. I hope that pronunciation is right, Ike.
Because we're not going to try again.
I'm not going to do it again. I'm going. Did you go away? I don't hear you. You tweaked out. Oh, you're gone. Is that everything?
Yeah.